because following Jesus is costly. Let me give you a quick illustration. We do a family budget in our house, and Amanda and I have agreed that there's a purchase threshold where if we're going to spend above this amount of money, we have to talk to the other person. Anybody else do this? Right? You can go and buy all the $10 items you want, and you don't need to check in. But if you're going to spend like $500 or maybe more or less, depending on your budget, you got to talk. Why? Because we recognize that the items we're purchasing that cost a lot of money are a commitment. Right? You're going to delegate your money in a certain area, and it can't be used in other areas. It's costly. And so when Jesus calls us to follow him, he is saying the same thing. You have to be all in. You don't live for Jesus for an hour on Sunday and then forget about him the rest of the week. It's everything. What does it take to follow Jesus in an anti-Christian age? You got to count the cost. And Jesus links the cost to his previous words about mission and starts to outline some conditions for discipleship. Very famously, verse 23, he said to all, if anyone would come after me, if you're going to follow me, you have to what? You have to deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. Now, I want you to read that verse again to yourself and ask yourself, what does that mean? Like, are those just words on a screen, or is that real? What does it mean for you? Because what Jesus is doing here is he's portraying a vivid, shocking, and horrifying image. Now, we take it for granted that we're 2,000 years removed from Roman crucifixion. Okay, no, we're not hearing today about people getting crucified in places. At least not in the news generally. It's in the history books, but for the disciples, that's what they were living with. Like, crucifixion in that day happened on a regular basis. It was gruesome. It was horrific. So put yourself in their shoes. Right? The image that he's talking about here was taken from the Roman custom where a condemned person would carry his crossbar or their crossbar to the site of their execution. It was this public processional, right? Literally, people are walking to their funerals. And what Jesus is applying here is this: the person carrying their cross knows their life in this world is finished. That's what he's trying to convey here. In other words, if I take up my cross and I follow Jesus, there's no turning back, as the song says. Jesus predicted his death, and he's telling his disciples, if you want to follow me, this is the road. Are you going to jump? Are you going to follow? Now, I want you to notice a few other points in the verse. First, denying yourself is more than just putting aside worldly pleasures. Because you might say, okay, listen, I regularly deny myself coffee or chocolates or a burger for a time. I'm fasting. But this verse right here is not, it may include that, but it's talking about much more. It's talking about disowning yourself. It's talking about turning from the idolatry of self-centeredness, and that is blasphemy in our modern age. I hope you're starting to see what Jesus is getting at. That if you want to follow Jesus in an anti-Christian age, you first need the conviction in the person and mission of Christ, and that's going to then lead to a costly commitment. Now, I want to pause for a moment and ask you, when you listen to messages in the world, what do you hear about the self? When was the last time you heard an advertisement or a TikTok video or a politician speak about self-denial? Instead, the ruling idol of our age is what? Radical self-expression. I can do what I want. I can live how I want. I can be who I want. Whatever I want, I can do. Why? Why? Because I'm following my heart. Or I'll put it another way. We no longer worship God. We too often worship ourselves. Author Thaddeus Williams notes that self-worship is actually the world's fastest growing religion. He cites a bunch of Barna stats that talk about Americans believing that the highest goal is to live life and enjoy it as much as possible. The best way to find yourself is by looking inside yourself. He mentions other things, but I suspect you know this, like inherently. But I want you to see self-worth. This is the opposite, the complete opposite of what Jesus is calling us to do. That if you want to follow Jesus, don't follow your heart. To follow Jesus, you got to become a heretic of this self-worship religion. And Luke says it's a daily action, which is different than Mark's account. Mark emphasizes the one-time event. Luke says this is daily, it's continual. Every day you got to take up your cross and follow him.